Today we're going to be talking about how to maximize participant response rates for your study. There are three topics we'll cover: the recruitment flyer or email that you'll be using to invite participants, including some do's and don'ts for the design and distribution, as well as the data collection format and thank you gifts. First of all, let's talk about the recruitment flyer. Um, Typically, when you are sending out an invitation or posting an invitation, you do need to give some careful thought to how you're presenting this information. We recommend that you use bullets to convey the information, not long paragraphs. Just try to bear in mind that if you're sending out an email, people are likely scrolling through their inbox, or if you're posting on social media, you really have a second or less to catch their eye and allow them to decide if they're going to keep scrolling or stop and read what your flyer has to say. So along those veins, make sure that you set the tone that you are going to honor the participants' time by being very concise in your invitation. They really don't need to hear the entire background of your study, and they certainly don't need to hear a lot of jargon, academic jargon. They really just need to hear the basic information, such as if you look down at these two bullets at the end here, you want to think about this like you're writing a headline. And so if you were, let's say, posting a flyer on social media, if you are able to list a tagline, something like 20-minute anonymous survey on parent stress, $5 Amazon gift card open for 2 weeks. So you'll notice here that I convey just the essential information in short phrases. And I think a lot of students really overlook that they need to state how long the study is open. Otherwise, the potential participants reading your invitation have no idea whether or not you will still be collecting data in 5 months. And I know you probably don't want to still be collecting data 5 months from now, but you need to state that up front so they know that if they want to participate, they should volunteer now. Also, it's important to bear in mind that you really should consider multiple formats and venues for getting your invitation or your flyer seen by your potential participants. So think very broadly. Think about social media, think about snowball sampling through your professional networks, and don't rely too much on any organization to recruit participants. A lot of times organizations are reluctant to share contact information. In some cases, the law prohibits them from sharing contact information of, let's say, their students or their patients. But it is okay for you to have someone within the organization forward that flyer or invitation on your behalf. That's usually the sort of the cleanest way to do things. Now, of course, the drawback is that you're not able to send follow-ups directly or reminders. And I mean, that's okay. That's a decent trade-off because if potential participants are receiving the invitation from someone within the organization, that does increase the likelihood that they'll look at it. And it also decreases the likelihood that the organization's spam filters would block your invitation. So I do recommend this first option here to try to figure out who within the organization would be willing and is appropriate to forward the invitation. And to do that, you would just need to talk to people within the organization. And also note that you don't need any letter of cooperation. You don't need any formal written permission if the partner organization's only role is to forward the flyer or invitation. And finally, you might want to suggest to your contact what subject line to use. Sometimes I've noticed on the back end that the well-meaning person who distributes the invitation just uses the subject line research study, and that's really vague. And like I discussed on the last slide, it's much better if the subject line conveys some essential information like 20-minute survey, $5 gift card, 2 weeks enrollment period, something like that. And most of the time, the people forwarding these invitations are grateful for anything you can prepackage for them. It just makes their role in this study easier. So as you are designing the recruitment flyer or email, keep these things in mind. I've already hinted at some of them. Make sure you use layperson language. Please, no academic jargon. When you're recruiting participants, you're not trying to impress them. You're trying to, clearly convey basic information to them. So no bonus points for using citations or academic jargon in the flyer. You also, of course, want to share your excitement about the topic and convey to them very briefly and succinctly why you believe this study is important and how it can benefit the field and benefit others in society. Also, bear in mind that when most people hear the word interview, their mind doesn't immediately jump to the context of research interviews. Most people are familiar with interviews in terms of what they see in documentaries and journalism. And there are some really major differences between journalistic or documentary and interviews and research interviews. So two things that you could highlight if you get into a little more detail in your flyer or in your invitation would be to mention that their identity is protected, and be sure you're very careful about whether you use the word confidential or anonymous. And if you're not sure which one describes your study, then talk to the IRB. That will be part of your IRB review, is confirming whether or not your data collection is truly anonymous or simply confidential. Also, typically you don't do video recordings for research interviews. It's typically an audio recording because the types of analyses that most social science researchers do are focused on the words that people share, not the visual cues. And I mean, there's some exceptions. We have some students collecting data using sign language, and certainly those involve interviews, but sharing those differences can be really helpful for people who might, not be as familiar with research interviews. Here's a list of things you should not do in your recruitment flyer or email. I mentioned don't use academic jargon. Don't make this about you. There's no need to tell a story about you and your background. If you like, you can do that as your later interacting with the participant, but it really just tends to be distracting, and it's not what the study is about anyway. And definitely don't ask them to quote unquote help you, and don't convey your bias. It's okay to convey your excitement about the importance of the study, but you don't want your recruitment method to bias who responds and who doesn't. So you don't want to give away the things that you're expecting to find or hoping to find. And that's a really fine line. Your committee will help you with that. And the IRB reviewers may have some additional comments on that to help you keep the invitation neutral, just so that you don't bias the results and threaten the integrity of your study. And then you also certainly don't want to exert undue pressure. With all research, and social science research in particular, it's important that people volunteer because they care about enhancing, knowledge in the field. And it's important that you don't pressure them that they need to be a team player because you're interviewing teachers and you really are hoping for 100% involvement from all the teachers of the school. That just would not be an appropriate dynamic. You really should make your point, make your sell with the value of the study itself. And again, not making it personal. This isn't about them helping you finish your degree. This is about them helping you address an important research question for the field. And now here are some do's or don'ts regarding the distribution of that flyer email. I do want to encourage everyone to consider a broad range, broad dissemination. A lot of students tend to think, oh, I'm going to recruit through a partner organization. That's okay, but that can be very limiting. Think big, think broad, especially if you're in a situation where you're worried about meeting your sample size, why limit it to just one region or one state if you could go nationwide? Um, think about using LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter to meet with the people who meet your inclusion criteria. Also think about recruiting individuals through contact info that's listed on websites that are public. And I'm not referring here to intranet websites. For example, if you work for the Department of Defense, you probably have access to a lot of internal websites that the rest of us in the public don't have access to. You're not allowed to use internal websites or privileged information that you access for your job. You're not allowed to use that contact info for recruiting for your study unless your employer specifically gives you permission to do so for your doctoral study. If appropriate for your research design, consider using your professional network and using snowball sampling. And you'll really need to talk that over with your committee to ensure that it doesn't bias your results, but it is certainly appropriate for a lot of designs. And also consider using the Walden participant pool. Our participant pool is made up of mostly doctoral students, and you are probably aware we have a number of professionals in the fields of education, management, healthcare, etc. And so consider adding that to your recruitment strategies. And to do that, you would just indicate in your IRB form that you want to have your study posted on the participant pool. Here are some things to not do as you are distributing your recruitment flyers. As I mentioned, do not use privileged info that you have access to through your employer unless your employer specifically gives you written permission to do so. And that's something the IRB will ensure is documented as part of your review. You may not delegate assistants, research assistants, to help you recruit. Now, to be clear, it is possible for someone, as I mentioned earlier, to distribute your flyer. However, anyone who wants to volunteer needs to contact you directly. It's not approvable for, let's say, a principal to distribute the invitations and then teachers to volunteer by telling their principal, I want to be in their study. In that case, any of the volunteers would need to contact you directly. And that takes me to the next point, which is, let's say that you do rely on a principal to distribute the invitation to all the teachers in the school. It's not okay for you to divulge to the principal who volunteered and who didn't. That would compromise the confidentiality of the study, and it would also likely introduce a dynamic of coercion that we definitely want to avoid in order to keep your study as ethical as possible. And you should be very careful anytime if you are in a situation where the organization has given you email contacts within their organization, you should be very careful not to send large batch email invitations. Now the guidelines on this change, I won't say daily, but they change frequently as all the organizations that I've come into contact with are beefing up their security to prevent spamming. Now, believe it or not, research invitations are considered spam because they're unsolicited invitations. It's obviously you're not trying to make money off of these individuals, but if you were to send an invitation to 10 people with an organization and your email address is outside that organization, it's very likely that your invitation will be flagged as spam or junk and possibly blocked or possibly flagged. It's going to vary from organization to organization. So even though it's tedious, I recommend sending out invitations individually, and that way you're less likely to get flagged as spam or junk. But this is an ever-changing landscape, so try to make yourself aware of, if possible, within the organization, try to find out if you would be blocked as spam. And that's another good reason to rely on an internal contact to distribute your invitation rather than you sending the invitations directly. And whenever possible, do not use attachments, right? We've all been taught don't open attachments from strangers. So, you don't need fancy graphics in your flyer invitation. I think bullets, a very simple bullet invitation really does get the job done. And if you do decide you really want to send the consent form as an attachment, it's best to do that on the second contact when the person at least would recognize your email address. Another option is that you could post your consent form on another website. You could create a Facebook page, you could create a Google page, and just share the link to the consent form. But again, this is an ever-changing landscape as well. So as our technology evolves, likely the options for sharing information will evolve. Okay, now consider data collection format very carefully. A lot of us, I think, go into a study with a preconceived notion, okay, I'm going to do interviews, and then something like COVID-19 happens, and you have to revise your plan and say, okay, I'm still doing interviews, but they're not going to be face-to-face anytime soon. And so you should offer participants, even when it's not COVID-19 lockdown time, you should consider offering participants flexibility whenever possible. Consider that not everybody has easy access to childcare or time to take off of work to meet with you in person. And so offering them a phone option is almost always likely to increase your response rate. And this second bullet is a tricky one. I think we can all agree that face-to-face is great. And then you also have phone and then video conferencing options like Zoom. And I think a lot of folks maybe assume that video conferencing is better than phone. I don't think we should be too quick to make that assumption. For example, as many of us are learning, as during COVID-19 restrictions, as more and more people have started using Zoom, not everyone has the bandwidth for Zoom to work correctly. And sometimes it's really difficult to hear. And they would have been better off just using a, normal phone line. It also does take a certain level of technical savvy to use the right kind of device and to get the camera working and the mic working. And in some cases, it requires a download, and not everybody's comfortable with that. So if you're trying to maximize your response rate, honestly, really think carefully about whether video conferencing is going to give you better data and whether it's going to make participants more comfortable or less comfortable. If people have never seen their own image as they're talking, I think we all, the first time we use Zoom or something similar, find it kind of distracting to see yourself like, oh my goodness, look at all those lines in my face and my hair looks terrible. I need to get it redone. People just fixate and they're distracted. And frankly, that's not just new users to Zoom. A lot of people just find it distracting. And a lot of people don't even look in the camera at the other person they're talking to. And so who knows, again, ever-changing landscape as people use it more and more, maybe it will become more natural. But I feel pretty confident saying we all have experience using the telephone to communicate. And so just don't overlook it as an option. It's more likely to increase your response rate, whereas using Zoom or video conferencing is likely to decrease your response rate, especially if people are in a situation where they don't really want to share the video of inside their home or inside their office, and phone is doesn't require that. So and just a quick note about Zoom, and I keep using that to as one option that has become very popular. There are some security issues, and so any of these platforms, if you were going to be discussing high risk topics such as illegal activities, you would need to carefully research whether or not adequate security can be provided or whether it's hackable. And that's sort of handled on a case-by-case basis depending on the risk level of the study. Okay, let's talk about thank you gifts. Some people call them incentives or payment even for being in a research study. There are some scenarios when you should not pay someone to be in a study. However, for Walden doctoral dissertations and doctoral studies, we encourage it. You're asking people to share with you something that is extremely valuable to them, and that is their time. And when someone is willing to spend 20 minutes completing a survey for you, or half an hour or an hour talking to you for an interview, that's an incredible gift. And a thank you gift does seem appropriate. And it does increase response rates, and it makes it more likely that people follow through on the arranged appointment time that you make for, let's say, an interview. So it's never should be described as a benefit of the study. It is literally is just a token of appreciation for their time and their effort, and in some cases, expense. Like if someone did drive to come meet you in person, they did spend a little gas money to get there. The amount of payment should be related to the time and the inconvenience and the effort. It should not be related to the level of risk involved. And that this will be part of your IRB review, your ethics review. We've never said, no, you can't give that much. But in theory, if you were offering, let's say, homeless individuals $300 to be in a study, one could argue that that would create undue coercion or undue pressure. So it's part of weighing the risk and benefit ratio. But what's most typical for social science studies is a $10 to $20 gift card. For example, a Visa gift card or Amazon gift card, depending on your population. I don't really recommend restaurant gift cards, honestly, because again, if we're thinking about maximizing your response rate, think about what does everybody use and need. And Visa probably is the most usable to anyone. They can use it to buy gas or groceries or whatever they want. Amazon gift cards are a popular one, but there are a lot of populations maybe that wouldn't be so crazy about receiving an Amazon gift card. And one guideline that we give, there are no hard and fast rules about this. We just say, think about what a nice meal costs. So let's say you're collecting data overseas where the currency, it's just a whole different, where $20 would just be a ridiculous amount of money maybe to spend on a gift. Think about what a nice meal would cost there, and that can give you a guideline for how much of a gift to share. It's not a great idea to do direct reimbursements. Bear in mind that you're not allowed to actually provide the transportation for individuals. You're not allowed to, give them a ride or pay for their Uber, and that just gets complicated. And you really don't. It's much more clear and straightforward to just say, well, here's the flat rate. This is a thank you gift that I'm providing the same amount to everyone. In some cases, you might provide course credit. A lot of universities have something like a participant pool where students earn course credit, and if they don't want to be in a study, they can do an alternate assignment, that sort of thing. Sometimes we have researchers who want to do a small donation on behalf of the participant to a preferred charity, and that is a fine option. It's okay to give a group gift. Let's say, a researcher might decide to give some books to an elementary school classroom, and that's fine, but it can't be done in a way where you say, I only give the gift if 100% of the class of the students volunteer. So it would just be a token, a gesture, just for any level of participation. And also bear in mind that the gift does need to be provided even if they skip some of the questions, because bear in mind that in the course of this type of social science study, people have the right to skip any questions they don't want to answer. And that might mean that their data is not analyzable, but it is their right to skip the questions. And if you are doing the type of study where let's say it's a quantitative study where you absolutely need to have a value for each question, then you can inform them of that up front. You can say, FYI, if you're going to volunteer, in order for me to analyze the data, I'll need a response to each of these questions. So if you decide to skip some questions, I won't be able to use your data. That's just sort of a disclosure you would make if that's the case. I don't recommend saying that unless it's absolutely true of your particular quantitative analysis, because most analyses can cope with some amount of missing data. Just be clear in the consent form about when they would be receiving the gift. The typical time to give the gift is at the conclusion of the data collection. So You just want to make sure that you're clear and consistent about that. There are a couple don'ts when it comes to thank you gifts. No cash, no raffles or drawings. You do need to give the same amount or the same thank you gift to every participant. No discount certificates. So for example, you're not allowed to say, oh, here's a gift certificate to a store where you get a $10 off a purchase of $30. You're not able to provide childcare or transportation. And if you have any additional questions, or if you have a specialized situation, I mentioned here, if your participants are adult students, prisoners, children, or people who reside in any type of institutional facility, then come to IRB office hours and discuss it. Well, I apologize for speaking kind of quickly. I wanted to share a lot of information in a short amount of time. As I mentioned, IRB office hours is a place where you can discuss these issues at greater length, or you're welcome to send an email to irb@mail.waldenu.edu. Thank you.